Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling, well, a truly epic story. It's etched not in stone, but in our DNA.
That's right.
We're diving into a recent genomic study. It's shedding amazing new light on what might just be the longest prehistoric human migration ever.
Yeah, tracing this incredible journey of early Asians all the way to the far reaches of South America.
And when we say long,
Oh, wow.
yeah, we mean a multi-generational trek. We're talking over 20,000 kilometers unfolding over, thousands of years.
Just try to picture that.
Right, starting up in North Asia and then eventually reaching Tierra del Fuego. It's the absolute southern tip of South America. It's almost unimaginable.
Absolutely stunning in its scale. And this groundbreaking research, it comes from an international genomic study published in Science.
A huge effort.
Massive. By the Genome Asia 100K Consortium. They analyzed DNA from, get this, over 1,500 individuals.
Wow.
From 139 diverse ethnic groups. Okay, so our mission today is really to unpack the core findings.
Let's do it. We want to understand the likely route these early travelers took, get a clearer timeline, when did they arrive in the Americas, explore how this incredible journey shaped their genes.
Which is fascinating in itself.
Totally. And ultimately, what does this all tell us about, human resilience and the sheer diversity of our species?
Well, the genomic evidence, it weaves a really compelling narrative. The study pretty much reinforces our understanding that, the initial human dispersal started in Africa.
Right, the classic.
Moved through North Asia.
Yeah.
And then culminated in this extraordinary arrival in South America.
But the world was different then, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. What's fascinating to consider is the world these early humans navigated. Coastlines, land bridges, they weren't fixed like today.
Right.
For instance, the presence of ice bridges would have been critical, absolutely critical, for allowing passage across what are now sea straits.
Okay, so this wasn't just a walk in the park, clearly. We're talking adapting to drastically different environments, landscapes. How did the researchers even begin to unravel a journey that happened so long ago?
Yeah, good question. The key really lies in the subtle changes in our DNA.
Okay.
By carefully comparing the shared ancestry and the accumulation of tiny genetic variations in modern populations, scientists can essentially follow the genetic footprints.
Like breadcrumbs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Left by these ancient migrations, these patterns of similarity and difference, they act like a historical record right there in our genes.
Amazing.
It allows researchers to reconstruct migration paths and even, estimate when different groups branched off from a common ancestor.
So after millennia on the move, these pioneers finally arrived in South America. Where did they first kind of set foot on this vast new continent?
The study points to the northwestern edge of South America. Think the region where Panama and Colombia meet today.
Okay.
That seems to be the initial entry point, probably around 14,000 years ago.
14,000 years.
Yeah. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. From this entry point, the population didn't just stay put.
Right.
It rapidly diversified and spread out into four major distinct groups.
Four main groups. Okay. Where did they end up settling?
Exactly. So one group ventured into the dense Amazon basin.
Wow, tough environment.
Definitely. Another moved eastward into the drier Chaco region.
Okay.
And a third group headed south, navigating the valleys of the massive Andes Mountains.
The Andean.
To eventually reach the icy plains of Patagonia.
Patagonia, all the way at the bottom. That's an incredible range of environments they covered.
It really is.
And does this timeline, this 14,000 years ago entry, does it line up with other evidence, like archaeological finds?
It does, yeah. It fits remarkably well, actually. Archaeological evidence suggests human settlements in North Patagonia as early as 14,500 years ago.
So pretty close.
Very close. It aligns nicely with the genomic estimates for their arrival in that broader region.
Okay, so these early South Americans, they established themselves in these incredibly diverse places, rainforests, high mountains, freezing south. What kind of impact did this long, challenging migration have on their genes?
Right. This is a really crucial aspect the study illuminates. The researchers found a significant founder effect occurred as these populations migrated.
Founder effect. Explain that a bit.
Sure. Think of it like this. If you take just a small handful of seeds from a large, really varied garden to plant somewhere new,
Okay.
the new garden will likely have less genetic variety than the original one, right?
Makes sense.
So the migrating group carried only a subset, just a fraction, of the total genetic diversity present in their North Asian ancestors. This initial bottleneck, this reduction in diversity, it had long-lasting consequences.
Like what? What kind of consequences?
Well, the study highlights that this reduction particularly affected genes related to the immune system.
Ah,
And here's kind of a sobering thought. This could potentially explain the later vulnerability of some indigenous communities to diseases introduced by European colonists centuries later.
wow. So less diversity in immune genes might have meant?
A reduced ability to fight off novel pathogens, exactly.
Mm.
So this incredible journey populating a continent, it also carried this hidden cost, you could say, reduced immune diversity.
Yeah, that's a powerful and somewhat unsettling insight, a tragic factor potentially playing a role later on.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? The long-term consequences of even these amazing human endeavors.
Definitely. And did their genes keep changing once they settled into these different parts of South America? Did they continue to evolve?
Oh, absolutely. As these groups became established in the really distinct environments of South America, geographical barriers, mountains, dense forests naturally led to further isolation between them.
Right, they weren't mixing as much.
Exactly. And this isolation, combined with the unique environmental pressures of each region, different climates, diets, local pathogens, it resulted in even more localized reductions in genetic diversity within those four main groups.
The study mentioned something called runs of homozygosity, ROHs. What are those exactly, and what do they tell us here?
Good question. Runs of homozygosity, or ROHs, are basically stretches of DNA where an individual has inherited the exact same genetic variant from both parents.
Okay, identical stretches.
Right. And high levels of these ROHs can be an indicator of reduced genetic diversity and maybe smaller ancestral population sizes in the past.
And did they find that?
They did. The study found significantly higher levels of these ROHs in native South American populations, particularly in groups like the Amazonians, the Patagonian Coesquar, and the Chaco Amerindians.
Interesting.
And interestingly, these levels were comparable to what you see in populations that have lived in isolated island settings for a very long time.
So like being genetically isolated but on a continental scale?
Pretty much, yeah.
And how did this higher level of homozygosity connect to other genetic stuff?
Well, the researchers found a clear link. Higher homozygosity correlated with lower overall nucleotide diversity.
Which means less variation overall in their DNA building blocks.
Exactly. Individuals within those groups have more similar DNA sequences overall, and they also found a smaller average total number of distinct HLA alleles.
HLA. Those are important for the immune system, right?
Crucial. Think of HLA alleles like the body's security system's facial recognition software.
Yeah.
The more diverse the software, the HLA alleles, the better the system is at recognizing and fighting off a wider range of intruders or pathogens.
So lower diversity here.
Could indeed have had implications for their ability to respond effectively to new diseases they hadn't encountered before.
This really paints a picture of populations whose genes were just profoundly shaped by these immense journeys and then the pressures of adapting to all these different environments.
It really does.
What else did the study reveal about their deeper ancestry and, how they adapted to these new worlds?
Well, it provided more clarity on their ancient origins. It reinforces that the West Beringian populations, groups like the Koryaks, Inuit, Lower Vetlans, are genetically the closest living relatives to Native Americans.
Okay, that connection holds up.
It does. However, because so much time has passed since they diverged, we're talking deep time here. Pinpointing a single specific Siberian group as the direct ancestor is really challenging.
Like finding one specific twig on a huge ancient tree.
That's a great way to put it. Time blurs those really ancient connections.
But wait, there was also an interesting finding about gene flow going back towards Beringia, wasn't there? Not just a one-way street.
Exactly. That was a cool finding. The study uncovered evidence of genetic exchange flowing from Native Americans back into these Beringian populations.
Really? How much?
About 5% in the Koryaks, and actually a more substantial 28% in the Inuit. And this seems to have happened sometime between 750 and 100 years ago.
Huh. So it suggests a more complex picture. Interactions, movement back and forth, maybe?
Precisely. It suggests these ancient populations weren't entirely cut off from each other, even across those vast distances, not just a simple single migration wave.
Fascinating. Okay, and what about those four distinct South American groups we talked about? The Amazonians, Andeans, Chaco, Patagonians. When did they actually become genetically distinct from each other?
The study estimates that this divergence, this splitting off, happened relatively rapidly, sometime between about 13,900 and 10,000 years ago.
So soon after that initial entry?
Yeah, it suggests that once the initial population entered South America, probably through Mesoamerica somewhere.
Right.
They quickly spread out and started adapting to the different environments available. And that led pretty quickly to the genetic differences we see today between those major groups.
Like a river splitting into 4 streams, and the life in each stream starts adapting differently.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, the fish, or in this case the genes, in each stream become distinct.
And speaking of adapting, the study also highlighted some specific genetic adaptations in these populations, didn't it? Real examples of evolution in action.
Oh yeah, some fascinating examples of natural selection. For instance, in those Beringian populations up north,
Right.
they found selection signals like genetic fingerprints of adaptation in genes related to how the body processes fats, like a gene called CPT1A.
Makes sense for a cold climate and fatty diet.
Totally. And also in genes involved in generating body heat, which again makes perfect sense given their adaptation to the extreme cold of the Arctic climate and a diet often rich in marine fats.
Any specific mutations?
Yes, a specific mutation in that CPT1A gene called Pro479Lu. It's actually quite common in Arctic populations. It's thought to help them maintain their core body temperature in those freezing conditions.
Wow. So their genes literally evolved to help them survive the cold. Incredible. What about the groups that went into the high Andes? The mountains?
Yeah, not surprisingly, they found evidence of what's called a selection sweep in the HIF2 gene, also known as EPAS1.
Selection sweep, meaning a beneficial gene became really common.
Exactly. It's a pattern in the DNA suggesting a particular genetic variant spread rapidly because it provided a survival or reproductive advantage. In this case, HIF2 is crucial for how the body responds to hypoxia, low oxygen levels.
Ah, high-altitude adaptation.
Precisely. A specific mutation in this gene is found commonly in high-altitude populations like Quechua speakers and Peruvians. It's very likely an adaptation helping them thrive in the thinner air at those elevations.
It's just amazing how finely tuned our genes can become to our surroundings over time. This study, it feels like it has implications that go way beyond just this one migration story, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the most significant takeaways, I think, is that this research really challenges a long-held assumption.
Which is?
The assumption that the greatest diversity of human genomes is found mainly in European populations. Their analysis using this huge Genomic Asia 100K dataset clearly shows that the highest levels of human genetic diversity actually reside within Asian populations.
That's huge, a fundamental shift.
It really is. It's a super important correction to our understanding, and it highlights the impact of, well, historical biases in who got sampled for large-scale genomic studies in the past.
Right. Sampling bias skewed the picture. And what about the practical applications of knowing all this?
Well, understanding the genetic makeup and the detailed migration history of indigenous populations is becoming, frankly, essential.
Oh, what?
For future biomedical research, for developing personalized medicine that actually works for everyone, and for putting effective public health initiatives in place.
How so?
Well, for example, that reduced genetic and immunogenic diversity we talked about earlier in some indigenous communities.
Yeah.
That can have direct implications for how they respond to both new and existing infectious diseases. Understanding that history helps us understand potential vulnerabilities.
So knowing their deep genetic history can directly inform modern healthcare strategies for them.
Precisely. And furthermore, the study just underscores this deep, intricate connection between these populations and their ancestral environments.
Right, the adaptations we discussed.
Exactly. Their unique genetic adaptations are often linked directly to their traditional diets, their lifestyles, the specific challenges of their homelands.
Which highlights the importance of
Conserving the environment, absolutely, and respecting the traditional ways of life of indigenous communities.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the devastating impact of events like the arrival of European colonists back in the 16th century.
which posed a huge threat.
A massive threat to their long-term survival, their cultures, their very endurance after thousands of years. It's a powerful reminder of how historical events leave these deep, lasting marks on our genetic heritage.
Yeah. Wow.
Indeed. The study also points out the significant role that simple geography played, like the narrow Isthmus of Panama.
The land bridge connecting the continents.
Right. It acted as a kind of filter or a bottleneck, shaping the migration routes into South America,
Yeah.
and then influencing the subsequent genetic divergence of the populations that made it through.
So a geographical bottleneck helped shape the genetic future of a whole continent.
In a way, yes. It's quite humbling, really, to consider how these events and features from so long ago can have such profound, lasting consequences we can still see today.
It really is.
Just one more point on a more clinical note. The researchers also identified a number of genetic variants known to be linked with disease risk or adverse drug reactions.
Okay.
And they found that the frequencies of these variants differ, sometimes quite a bit, across the various populations they studied, which again just underscores why we need diverse genomic data. We needed to better understand and address health disparities between different groups.
So this deep dive into an ancient migration has brought us right up to some very modern, incredibly relevant conclusions about health, diversity, and history.
It really has. It's a powerful reminder, I think, that the past continues to shape our present in profound and often unexpected ways, right down to, well, the very blueprint of our being.
Okay, let's try to bring it all together then. This remarkable study, it's provided compelling evidence for this, well, extraordinary multi-generational migration of early Asians to South America, a journey of truly epic proportions.
Unbelievable scale.
And this incredible trek, and then their subsequent adaptation to this vast array of environments across the continent, it profoundly shaped the genetic diversity, the resilience of the indigenous populations, leaving these lasting impacts on their health, their unique adaptations, and ultimately their history.
And maybe it leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Considering this immense journey across continents, across millennia, and the incredible environmental challenges these early humans overcame, plus the enduring genetic legacy that continues today,
Yeah.
how does understanding this deep history reshape your perspective on human adaptability, on the profound interconnectedness of global populations across time?
And perhaps even more importantly,
What responsibility do we have now to understand, to respect, and maybe even help protect the rich genetic and cultural heritage of these pioneering communities? They hold such a vital, fascinating piece of our shared human story, don't they?